What's up, everyone? Happy Monday. We're going to do a quick recap here. I specifically just want to take a look at CrowdStrike and GameStop in this video because we have the YouTube live session later today to dive into the broader markets because there's a lot going on for us to take a look at. So let's pivot away from all this noise and let's take a look at CrowdStrike first really quick. And boom, there it is. I had a short on in there today because it just gapped down. And I did not see that getting better. It was a very basic thesis, about as basic as you could possibly get. Bad news, and with a gap down on top of that, it just looked like the sellers were coming out, and they did. If you take a look at this volume candle behind my head right here, this volume candle was 90% sale volume. There was just nobody wanting to step in front of this thing, and that's really what led to this big red candle all the way down. So this surprised me a little bit. It looked like it was starting to mellow out, especially because we had the candle come down. Touching the 200 is whatever. I guess it's something. I don't care so much about that. It's just the fact that there was a candle, because what that tells me, like this wick, because it tells me that people were still selling, and then sooner or later somebody started buying, right? That's what moved it back up. So the fact that it went down here and then moved back up, it indicated to me that people might be willing to start buying this thing. And then today just, nope, gap down all the way down. And notice how little tiny this wick is. This is just massive sale volume all day. Not a lot of people wanting to transact in there. So what does this mean? Well, this is why when I talked about this over this past weekend, I set 2 alerts to the upside and downside. And I specifically said, I'll trade it either direction. I don't care. I still think this move is probably overdone when we finish getting the news. I think the reason why it's not overdone right now is because the market is still synthesizing the impact and the overall severity of things, which clearly we don't have a firm grasp on just yet. So that's that. Interesting. Now, let's pivot over to GameStop, because there were a couple people that hit me up today asking about a bunch of put volume in the stock. And it looks like folks were seeing a lot of put sales is what they tell me. So I thought we could take a investigative look together and see what's going on in here. So let's dive right in. The first thing I notice is we're still so range bound. We have this low over here, which is not using the wick, using the body. The body of this is somewhere around like 23 and a quarter, something like that. And then to the upside, again, just using the bodies, not the wicks, it's like 28.50, something like that. So we're just so range bound in here. And we're seeing a little bit of life just in terms of upward pressure. But if you take a look at the candle today, it's still not super bullish. So it was 48% sale volume today. So what this tells me is that there are still people trying to fade this, but there are just a slight edge in people wanting to buy it, which I do find interesting. I also find interesting that it crossed over / under on the CCI. I'll get myself out of the way real fast so you can see. Right there's the CCI. I don't care a ton, again, about technical analysis in this specific product because it is so different in how it behaves. I see people say all the time, like, oh, it respects this perfectly. And it's like, no, it doesn't, man. Like, it doesn't. It's why it does this is because it does other stuff. So the main thing I'm trying to emphasize is when you're looking at something whose price behavior is not solely determined by whether or not people are valuing the company higher than they did yesterday, there are other forces at play. And it's important to acknowledge that, because if the idea here is that you can run technical analysis in here, like standard technical analysis, like you're gonna have a hard time. You're gonna have a really hard time moving and playing with this thing. Because the other thing, like just from a general price movement perspective, something to go from essentially all the way down here to shoot up to this, it's like that's an abnormal movement. It's what makes it so cool. So I would just encourage people to keep an open mind when it comes to looking at the product. You'll see that I still will overlay some level of technical analysis, but it's a sliding scale. If I'm trading something like this as compared to the indices, the weight that I'm going to apply on technical analysis is going to be completely different, rightfully so, because they behave very differently. So let's take a look at these options chains. The first thing I noticed is that volume today was heavy but light. Here's what I mean. From an overall volume perspective, we're just under 200,000 contracts. That's relatively light for GameStop. It's heavy in the sense that this 200,000 call volume was opposed by just 46,000 puts. So really big call skew volume on the day, and we're back at it yet again, with the majority of this being for this coming Friday. I've learned one of my favorite sayings that they use, that you guys use in the ape community, which I'm continually just loving learning about. But they'll say, you know, that it's always tomorrow. Always. I actually love that so much. We use similar sayings in the military. We'll say things like the easiest day was yesterday and bullshit like that. But it reminds me of that, where it's just like, it's always tomorrow. Because, I mean, this is just a lot of volume for a seemingly quieter period. But again, that's what makes this thing so interesting, is that a quiet period could be quickly not a quiet period. I mean, and to prove that point and to kind of provide the counter to my own statement there, this was a real quiet period. It had a high of 15, a low of 10, and it was just kind of trending around in here. And then all of a sudden, it was no longer quiet, like pretty quick. So I understand that. Now, again, the way I would structure my trades and all that stuff is very, very different, but that doesn't matter. So let's take a look instead at some of this open interest now, where we're starting to see more call OI building out. Still has a ways to go in order to get to like it's at least 2 times put OI, right? So the put OI on this right now is 371,000 compared to 622K on the call side. So this isn't the same ratio we've seen previously when it starts getting like super, super bullish. Now, let's take a look at the time and sales and see if we can find these series of put trades that people are talking about. People are saying that there's a bunch of like bullish put trades that come out. So the first thing I'm going to do is kill off these spreads. I don't really care to see spreads in this context, so I nuked those. The next thing is I'm looking at both calls and puts, both buys and sales in here. And there are different ways we can filter this. So what I'm going to do is start by filtering and looking at just the put side to see if I can find where all these puts were coming in. So here's one block right here that I can see clear as day. So these, the market was 162 by 182. So this came technically towards the mid of that market, but it's closer to the bid side. So this tells me that looks like a sale. That looks like somebody sold 847 of the 25 puts expiring in 2 Aug. That's what that looks like to me. And you can run through and do that kind of analysis all the way through here. So in this case, for the 26 July expiration, the 24.5 puts, these look like somebody bought them because the market was 59 by 66. These came in at 66. That looks like a purchase trade. Now, again, the kind of syntax that Thinkorswim uses, if it's red, it's telling you that it likely was sold. And then if it is green, it likely was bought. So if we sort these by quantity to kind of see where the bigger trades came in, I don't see this giant sale volume that people were alluding to. I do see sales for sure, but I also see a lot of buying of puts. So all I'm kind of pulling away with here is that this doesn't look conclusive to me either way, that there is massive amounts of one or the other. It looks like a bit of a mixed bag. Now, to get a cleaner view, we can take a look at something like this from our buddies over at Unusual Whales, which they have a neater tool, right? It's just cleaner to see. And we can take a look. We want to see instances where we transacted at the bid and we want it just for the puts and we want it for today, which is what this is looking at. And there was a couple big trades, no doubt. So we have out in 2026, 2 of them, and that's important to note. So we have the, what are these? The 120s and the 125s out in 2026. For the more near term into August, we have the 25s. So these are big, but not crazy, not absolutely insane for what we've seen. Now, if we open this up to take a look at the premium that's been transacted in here, it's a little bit of a different story because I actually see another thing that's way more interesting to me, which is this. Take a look at that. That is a series of calls out in 2025 and 2026. So these are long dated, kind of boring for the near term stuff. But take a look at this. They're getting punched in relatively consistent timing, 500, 500, 500, 500, 500, all at the 20s. And they're bringing in a lot of money. So this is somebody that's selling calls. They sold 463,000 there, 460. Like, this is a ton of money that they brought in. This here's easily over $3 million worth of premium, especially if this is also the same person, which I probably would guess it is. So these 20s got cracked with a ton of short premium that somebody with a pretty big position is building this up. So if we have 500 contracts, that gives us 50,000 shares times 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll start there. That gives us 300,000 shares right there. Then we have essentially, let's call it another 50, 100. I mean, this is a pretty massive position is kind of what this boils down to. I'm probably seeing something to the tune, I'm guessing, of like maybe 400,000 shares, a little over that, especially because I just noticed it goes even further down here that they were still hitting these. Now, this is a really, really interesting trade to me because for me, from a trading perspective, the prospect of selling premium that's all the way out there in 2025 is fascinating. The reason why it's fascinating is because it doesn't move that much. So if we go out here to 17 Jan 25, I think that's when those were, right? The 17 Jans. This one. Okay, or no window. One sec. There it is. There it is. A little bit of a delay. Yeah, 17 Jan 25s. So as I look at those, I look at the 20s, they're in the money. So that's good from a perspective of essentially hedging a potential downside. So if you have a really big position and you want to hedge some of the downside, you can sell those calls in the money because if they fall out of the money, you've made a ton of money. Now, the other interesting thing that I find about these 20s is if you look at the theta, they're getting 2 pennies a day. It's just not that much money, especially if they had instead came into something even as close as the 25s, but like the 32s, 39s, even these 60s. If we take a look at something like those 20s, they're still at least at an extra penny a day, which might not sound like a lot, but on a position that size, it's actually quite meaningful. And 60 days, within 60 days, is right as theta decay starts to really accelerate. So that position is very interesting to me. And that looks like somebody building a position that has a lot of shares, because that's the reason why these would be sold, in my opinion, is against shares. They could be sold naked, definitely. To me, that would be madness, especially on something that can move the way that this thing does, to sell those in the money. I would say that this is far more indicative of somebody who has shares that they would not mind selling at 20 if they had to, and they're collecting a bunch of money to do it. That's what that is. Now, from the other trade that I saw today that was really interesting was the 362 lot at the 20s. Again, same expiration. This is out though in 2026. And these came in at the offer. So somebody bought these and they bought almost $500,000 worth of this position. So there's a lot of big volume coming into this thing. If you take a look at the premium that's being transacted in, remember the last couple times I showed you this, we see like a handful, maybe 10, 12 positions with total premium above $100,000. Now, if you take a look at this, it's literally this whole entire top of the screen that's above $100,000. Now, if we limit this specifically to people that are buying calls, you'll see that it's slower. We do have that giant $500,000 position, but beyond that, it's much slower. So this, to me, looks like people settling in, not necessarily playing these really short-term giant upside moves, but moving around established positions. That's my best guess as it sits right now. We'll see. As always, we'll see. It's fun to keep an eye on this. It's fun to see where it goes. If there's ever anything you want me to take a look at, let your boy know. I love looking at this stuff. Be an outlier. I'll see you guys later.